I have caught forgers, blackmailers, and one very determined poisoner. I had never, until this week, been required to catch a jealous man in the act of being one. Fortunately, Flynn made it easy.
There is a version of this case in which I behaved like a professional throughout. This is not that version.
Maud West, private inquirer, licensed, discreet, and, as of a Tuesday morning in November, in receipt of a bouquet of flowers, a business proposition, and a detective inspector who has decided, against all his own better judgment, to have an opinion about both. The Hastings case.
Thomas Hastings arrived at 11, precisely on the hour, which told me a great deal before he had said a word. A punctual man is either very honest or very frightened. Managing director of Hastings and Company, a private bank on Cornhill with 100 years of quiet reputation behind it. Reputation he was currently watching leak away through a hole he could not find.
Miss West, forgive the hour. I find I sleep rather badly at present, so 11 o'clock feels almost restful by comparison.
Sit down, Mr. Hastings. Tell me about the hole in your accounts.
Small sums, a few pounds here, a few there, always from our oldest and least vigilant clients, the Sterling family chief among them, 3 generations of quiet deposits, and old Mrs. Sterling hasn't looked closely at a bank statement since her husband died. Not enough to sink us outright, enough to ruin us slowly, and enough that if I bring in the Bank of England's auditors, every depositor in London will hear of it within the week.
So you want a pair of eyes that isn't on your own payroll, and a face nobody at Cornhill will recognise?
Exactly so. I'd have you in as my private secretary. Every meeting, every client visit, every ledger that crosses my desk. I've followed your cases in the papers. Miss West, the club affair, the Calder business, your mind is considerably better suited to this than mine.
He said it plainly, without the theatre men usually bring to a compliment. I found I believed him.
The retainer is £500. I'd count it money well spent.
I was on the point of naming my terms when the door did not so much open as concede.
I hope I'm not interrupting an audit, Miss West. Your street door was unlocked.
It generally is, Flynn, for people who knock.
I had come about the Sterling account on a tip that had reached the Yard an hour before. I had not expected to find the account's own managing director already installed in Maud's good chair, nor to dislike him quite so immediately, nor to have to work out, standing in the doorway, which of those two facts I was actually reacting to. You'll be Hastings. Inspector Flynn, we haven't met. Scotland Yard opened a file on your bank this morning. Suspicious movements of capital.
Then we want the same thing, Inspector. I've asked Miss West to look at it from inside.
The Yard doesn't require private assistance, Mr. Hastings.
The Yard's assistance, as I recall, generally arrives after the damage is done. Mr. Hastings would like it prevented.
A word, Maud, alone.
Mr. Hastings is a client, Flynn.
Mr. Hastings is a person of interest, and if you take his money, you'll be giving evidence in a case you're being paid to obscure.
I don't believe I've been accused of anything yet, Inspector, but do go on.
Thomas, give us the room. He inclined his head and left with the kind of grace that made the whole exchange look worse for Flynn, not better. When the door had closed, you've decided he's guilty before you've read a single ledger.
I've decided he's convenient. Men like that always are.
You mean charming?
I mean convenient.
Neither of us corrected the other further. I finished my tea and told him I would be at Cornhill on Thursday.
A retainer accepted, a file opened, and an inspector who has, by his own account, decided nothing at all about the man now signing Maud West's checks. Before we go deeper into the case, subscribe and tap that notification bell so you don't miss new episodes. We return for Act 2.
Hastings and Company ran on a controlled sort of elegance, brass, mahogany, and the particular hush of a room where everyone is being paid to seem calm. I had the run of the ledgers within a day. By the second, I had found what I was looking for and said nothing about it. A clerk named Miller, whose recorded hours never quite matched the discrepancies, always arriving to check the books within an hour of a loss being noticed. A man cleaning up after himself, or a man too eager to be seen looking.
Maud, I thought these might improve the desk. A thank you for the hours you've put in on the sterling files.
You needn't, Thomas.
I know. Dinner perhaps once this is behind us. There's a quiet place off Sloane Street.
Here for the sterling correspondence. Again.
He crossed that lobby the way other men cross a stage they've decided is theirs.
A bit public for a private inquiry, isn't it, West? Or does the fraud trail run through the florist as well?
Flynn.
I want the vault logs, Mr. Hastings, today.
You are, of course, welcome to them, Inspector, though I confess I'm growing curious what it is you're actually here to find.
I'm here to find out why my best consultant is doing secretarial work for a man under suspicion and being paid in flowers for her trouble.
You're making a scene, Flynn.
I'm doing my job. Somebody in this room ought to.
He didn't say too close to the man. He didn't need to. Thomas looked genuinely bewildered. Flynn looked genuinely miserable. And I looked down at Miller's name in my own handwriting and understood, not for the first time, that both of them were watching each other, instead of the one person actually worth watching.
Evening falls on Cornhill. The clerks go home. One does not. Maud West returns after dark and tells no one exactly where she means to look next. An inspector who has learned her habits may draw his own conclusions.
I had told Flynn I would be at Cornhill until 9, going through the archive. What I did not tell him was that I intended to be in Miller's private locker by past, since a man that anxious to be helpful generally keeps his sins close at hand. I was 3 pages into a set of forged transfer slips when the vault door, which I had propped, was pushed fully shut behind me. Miller was not the anxious clerk I had catalogued. In that room, with the door shut, he was a good deal larger and a good deal calmer than his ledger entries had suggested. His hand closed over my wrist before I had finished my sentence, and tightened when I did not give him the reaction he was expecting. I have talked my way out of worse rooms than this one. I did not get the chance to try.
Maud.
He said my name, not West, not Miss West. The way a man says a word he has stopped bothering to guard. He had Miller against the deposit boxes before I had finished drawing breath. And it was not, by any measure, a regulation arrest.
Touch her again, and I will not trouble the yard with a report.
Flynn. He's had enough. Let the cuffs do the rest, Flynn.
I have arrested a great many men without raising my voice. I did not entirely trust myself to do the same with this one, and it took Maud saying my name twice, gently, before I put the cuffs on Miller instead of my hands around his collar. I did not examine just then why the sight of that vault door shutting had done what it did to me. There would be time for that later. There is always time for that later.
Miller was cleaning out the sterling accounts and letting the loss fall on Thomas's ledger, hoping the yard would remove him and the chair would come open. Your suspicion did the framing for him rather nicely, Flynn.
I know.
You needn't say it like a confession.
It rather feels like one.
We'll pause there a moment. If you're listening to Micropulse, we'd love to know where you are and what hour it is, wherever you happen to be tuning in tonight. Leave it in the comments. Your corner of the world, your hour of the evening. Every note helps this community along, and we do read every one. Now, back to Cornhill.
Thomas called on us the following evening, ostensibly to thank us both. I suspect he had a second reason.
Miller's confessed in full. Your inspector's men have the transfer slips. I owe you both a great deal, Miss West. More than £500 in the end.
You owe me the £500, Thomas. I'll take the rest as a compliment.
I'd like to make it permanent, if I may. Head of a small department I mean to create, looking into exactly this sort of thing before it becomes exactly this sort of thing. Good hours. Better pay than private inquiry, certainly. I'd only ask your full attention, not half of it split with Scotland Yard.
He said it plainly, the way he says most things. And it was, I understood, a real question, not a piece of theatre for Flynn's benefit. Flynn did not move. Flynn did not, for once, say anything at all, which was its own kind of answer to a question no one had asked him. That's a generous offer, Thomas. And I find I don't want it.
May I ask why not?
Because my attention is already rather badly divided, and I've only just worked out which half of it I mean to keep. Thomas had the good manners not to look at Flynn when I said it, though I imagine it cost him something.
I won't give up on the offer, Maud. I still would enjoy a dinner at the Savoy.
He collected his hat, thanked us both again, and left with considerably more dignity than the scene deserved of him. Flynn stayed to help me close up the office, which is not a thing Flynn does, and we both pretended it was ordinary.
You turned down £500 and a department of your own.
I turned down a very comfortable cage, Flynn. There's a difference.
I didn't say anything. In there.
I noticed and noted.
I didn't trust what I'd say.
It is, I think, the plainest sentence Flynn has spoken to me since I have known him. I did not make a joke of it. I found, rather to my own surprise, that I did not want to. Nor did I this evening. It seems to be going around. He looked at me for a long moment. Not the careful neutrality he generally manages, but something he had stopped bothering to arrange. Then he picked up his hat, the way Thomas had, and for once the two gestures did not mean the same thing at all.
Good night, Maud, until the next case.
Good night, Flynn. He left. I did not, this time, pretend I hadn't watched the door for longer than the door deserved. The kettle had gone off the boil twice over, and I made the tea anyway, badly, and sat with it going cold, while I decided what to do with an evening that had, without my quite arranging it, told me something I have been declining to examine since the Savoy. I have not yet decided what I intend to do about it. I am no longer entirely sure I intend to do nothing. Until the next inquiry, I remain Maud West, private inquirer.
You've been listening to the case files of Maud West. Tonight's episode, The Hastings Case. Join us next time when another truth waits to be brought to light by whoever is patient enough and honest enough to go looking for it.